Hey everybody, I am at the DMV in Los Gatos, and I'm going to wait just a second to get started here. I'm going to stand in the shade, and we're going to talk about public records. So this is California's DMV, which they have in every state. Obviously, it is a state agency that governs how we get licenses, how we get identification. And right now, if anybody's dealing with the real ID issue so that they can travel on planes, there are a lot of things that you have to soon do by having a real ID. So I came here a day or two ago, and there was somebody who was cursing, and you know how I feel about that. And he was asked to leave, and he was really kind of heated, and he was making kind of a scene in the Department of Motor Vehicles. So I had to come back here again today. I do have a July birthday, so for anybody who knows what happens when your license expires every 4 years on your birthday, I did have to come back here. Not for that, but that's why I was here the other day, and today I'm helping somebody else with that. But what was interesting is, first of all, can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? I see a lot of you. Pamela, Sound Minds, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear. So the reason that I came down here is because one of the most epic public records requests that I ever saw a journalist do was one of my mentors in public records, and it was against the Department of Motor Vehicles. And so I want to take a second to describe the difference between public records at state agencies, at federal agencies, and then also at the courts. Because this is a copy of records from the courts, which I have waited over a month to get. So we're going to talk about getting public records and the access to public records, and what we see a lot in the way of retaliation when you try to get these records. So years ago, almost 20 years ago, one of my associates and one of my best public records mentor, tried to get records from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they wouldn't give it to him, and that's a state agency. And so what we learned from that is when a journalist can't get public records, what they have to do is they have to have a lawyer who sues for the records. And if you win the public records request, then the attorney that sues for you gets paid. They give them attorney's fees for the amount of time that it takes to do the public records. And so, and the journalists, we don't get money for it, we just get the records. And remember, journalists are no different than any member of the public, we just have certain training. And so the DMV is a state agency, and if you need to sue for records, you have to sue a state agency. And one of the things that we learned about that is you can pretty much pick the court that you want to sue in a state agency. So if you think the judges are going to be a little more favorable to the First Amendment and journalists, as happened with one of my mentors, the attorney sued up in Oakland because they knew the judges would be a little more inclined to support the journalists. And that they did win. And the attorney, way back in 2000, and I think it was 6, so it was almost 20 years ago, he got about $40,000 in attorney's fees, and that was a lot of money back then. So I wanted to do my live here because I know how hard records are to get. I know that you guys, when you're interested in something at your local DMV or you're interested at a local agency, I see the retaliation, I see how you get ignored, and it is important to be able to get records, whether you're a member of the public or... And I've seen some good judges write decisions that say things such as, look, the public already paid to create these records. That is the government's business, and we're entitled to be able to see it. And what was interesting about those records that my associate got was that he ended up, I asked him, well, what story did you write when you got all those records from the Department of Motor Vehicles? And he said, oh, I didn't write a story because there wasn't anything important in the records that I could write a story about, as I thought there might have been. And so that brings up the effort that they went to keep records away from a reporter. And we see that a lot. We see when a reporter is in a courtroom, that the bailiffs, just yesterday, I had a bailiff identifying a reporter in a courtroom. When a reporter asks for records, people pay attention. It's kind of like an arrest to the government. You're saying, hey, we think there's something up, or we're looking at something and we want the records to see if there is something to what we're considering. And so when I go somewhere like the DMV, I just think of all the records that I could request if I had nothing better to do, or if I had an interest in it, or I were going to write a story. So that the reason that came up and why I wanted to do that is for the last month and a half, I've been asking for records that are court records. And while DMV is state records, federal agency records are FOIAs. So when you hear people talk about getting records from the FAA or the FDC or even the White House, those are FOIA records. And that goes to the government. And there is a reporter that I follow. His name's Jason Leopold. He works for a news outlet called BuzzFeed. And he might be with Bloomberg now. But he is the best at FOIA records. And I have followed him for years. And sometimes we wait years for these records. I've seen him wait 4 years. I've waited 4 years for records. And so imagine the government just holding on to those records so that a reporter doesn't get them. But the records I want to talk about today are judicial records. Those are the administrative records. So when you're covering the courts, we cover the adjudicative records. Those are the court filings. Those are the records that you find in the courthouse. And then we cover the court's administrative records. And those are the records related to the business of the court and how much money the court is spending, how they're spending that money. Those are the records that we get about the committees judges sit on, what judges do in their non-judicial time. And so very few journalists know how to get administrative records. And the code under that is California Rules of Court 10.50. And it probably exists in other states. When I tell you guys things, it's from my perspective in California. I don't have the time to cover it in other states, but this should give you an idea of how you get these records. So to give you an idea of what court records we've gotten and why they're important and how I have used them in my reporting is we first exposed the Santa Clara County Bar Bench Media Police Committee. And that was a group, I want to call it underground. The Bar Bench Media Police Committee operated in this county for 30 years and nobody thought anything of it. It was run by judges. They were using money from the grand jury. And they were meeting 3 times a year. If you look back through my regular videos, I think that video has about 500,000 views. And they were just meeting and talking about their views, opinions, and ideas. And the only records that they kept were records about what they were ordering for dinner and the speakers they were inviting. And when they invited the speakers for dinner, the taxpayers paid for the dinner. But there was no notice of these meetings. There was no public access to these meetings. It was just basically a tax-funded club for the judges and the lawyers in Silicon Valley. And they invited newspaper publishers and reporters. And obviously, if you're inviting reporters to sit with the government, you know, an ethical reporter does not take money from the government. An ethical reporter reports on the government. That's our job, is to push back on the government. And so that's what I've done with court records. And as a result, throughout the state, but specifically in Santa Clara County, we found out that judges were appointing all these minors counsel in addition to running this secret club. And minors counsel are attorneys for children. And you can understand that in a criminal case where a child's welfare might be something that the courts need to consider, why a child might need an attorney in extreme cases. Victims advocates, maybe attorneys and that kind of thing. But one of the little shady practices in family court is the appointment of these attorneys to represent children during their parents' divorce and custody case. And these minors counsel get paid either by the parents, and if the parents don't have any money, they get appointed, they get paid by taxpayers. And these are attorneys. There's no rules about what they do in the representation, and the judges and the attorneys just throw out the saying, oh, we're acting in the best interest of a child. It is never in the best interest of a child to keep litigation going so that attorneys make money. It is never in the best interest of a child to drain their parents financially, paying an attorney for the child who just has to read emails and do all these things. So we've really been appalled at the amount of money that we have seen these minors counsel being paid. And in some states, they call them GALs, or best interest attorneys. But today, when I was at the courthouse getting these records, I did run into one of the highest paid public funded minors counsel. Her name's Catherine Schlepphorst. And I asked her if she wanted to comment on the fact that we have minors counsel for these children in these cases until they're 18, but we don't have court reporters, we don't have interpreters, we don't have the basic things to operate the public courts, because we have been gradually working to benefit attorneys. So if you follow me, you know there is nothing more upsetting to me than an unethical attorney, a greedy attorney, an attorney who is paid with taxpayer dollars and is not held accountable. And I have some at the top of my list, and you'll hear that name and see that name frequently. But I also watchdog judges. And so I saw Chili was in here a few seconds ago. I keep trying to move to the shade so I can see your comments and who's in. But we watchdog the judges. And I don't think people really understand the immunity. Judges have absolute immunity. Police officers only have quasi-immunity, but judges have absolute immunity. And they have very little responsibility with the way of accountability. They're granted broad discretion. And it is very difficult to get a judge removed from the bench. And judges are usually appointed by the governor. And so what we look at is patterns with judges, and if they're wasting public resources. We don't look so much at their judicial decisions, but one of the things we see is certain judges appointing a lot of attorneys as minors counsel when there's not really a reason. It's hard for the public to see why that would be. And so that's one thing that we've gotten records on, how much money these attorneys that are appointed are paid. If we want to find out how much they're privately paid, we have to get adjudicated records and go through the court files to find it. But if we want to find out how much taxpayers pay these attorneys, then we have to get public records under California Rules of Court 10.500. And in Santa Clara, we've done it for Contra Costa County, Santa Clara County, Sonoma County, San Joaquin County, Merced County, several counties in California. And most of them do not waste the amount of money that Santa Clara County wastes. We spend millions of dollars a year here on children having attorneys because their parents are getting a divorce. And some of those divorce cases are lasting 10 years, and the minors counsel is being paid by taxpayers the entire time. So I also watchdog judges in elections because those don't come along very often. Judges in California are appointed by the governor, and 99% of judges have been appointed by a governor. There's only been 2 elections in Santa Clara County for judges, and that was in 2018, where Judge Persky was recalled and Judge Hendrickson was elected. And then recently there was an election in 23 and 24 about the 3 people who were running for judge. And I wrote about that. We got records, I wrote about it, and I wrote about it statewide because there was some controversial judge elections. So I did write about it. But the judge who won in Santa Clara County is Judge Johnny Stebbins. And she is a former prosecutor. And during the time when I was reporting on her, I made a comment about my opinion about her. And I am a Santa Clara County voter, and I am a journalist, and I'm a publisher, and I made a comment, and I made a comment about her competence as a prosecutor, but at the end of the day, I also compared her opponents, one of whom was the chief of staff from the district attorney's office, and one who was a divorce attorney by the name of Nicole Ford. And out of the three, my opinion was that this judge, Johnny Stebbins, would probably be the best candidate. And I gave people that opinion if I had to. And it was really kind of the lesser of two evils. And one of the first things that we look at when we're looking at prosecutors running for DA is a lot of them are making $300,000 to $400,000 a year. And so the first thing that happens when they become a judge, they're only making about $220,000 a year. So they're not doing it for the pay. Cops that are assigned as bailiffs in their courtrooms make more money than them. And so it's usually power, it's usually prestige, but in California it's also grooming them to become private judges in retirement, which is very, very lucrative. They'll get their pension from the DA's office, they'll get their pension from being a judge, and then they can go out and be a private judge where they're paid far more than they would ever be paid as a public judge. So Judge Stebbins is the first judge that I have seen, because I've been observing these courtrooms for a long time, that made a disclosure at the beginning of a family law case. And we just don't see judges making their disclosures. And so she disclosed that divorce attorney Nicole Ford had contributed to her campaign. And she said that other attorneys had as well. And the reason that's important is if you are in a case opposing any of these attorneys that supported the judge, it would be important to know if maybe the judge was acting with a little favoritism for the attorneys and their clients who had supported their campaign. So I tried to get the records. Starting on June 2nd, I tried to get the records that Judge Stebbins disclosed is available from her court clerk. And I did it because she said you can just walk into her courtroom and get the records. And so I said I had people that asked for the records. I asked for the records, and the court then said, oh, those are administrative records, and that we would have to pay for them because they were not digital, and that they were in binders. They made it sound like there were these just binders and binders of disclosures. So 2 members of the public went to the court on Monday and tried to get the records, and they said that the records could only be viewed in the judge's courtroom and that they could not photograph them because of the laws about not photographing in the courtroom. And I want to say the judge is in charge of that in her courtroom, so she could have very easily said, yeah, sure, take a picture of this, don't photograph other things in the courtroom. But if she made it in order, they would be held in contempt if they didn't follow it. But she didn't do that. She told them that they could look at the records, but that they couldn't copy them. They offered to pay for them. They wouldn't let them copy them. And then she also had the bailiff with his badge and his gun standing over there, telling them that they could not, did you get it? Okay, I'll be right there. Give me one more second. That they could not even take notes. So these are the records. I finally got them today. Lisa Herrick, who is the attorney for the court, kept it from me. She kept trying to clarify how we were gonna pay for them, if we wanted to pay for them, and that kind of thing. And so we went back and forth for a month. And the public should not have to wait a month to get judges' disclosures of what judges supported them and what attorneys supported them. So there were also a lot of police associations. Notice Los Gatos PD was there. Some judges that were quite controversial had supported her. But she had a list also of local leaders, who include the mayors who supported her, and the attorneys. This began the attorneys that supported her. And it goes on for several pages. And if you look, all of the pages are typed, planned, and at the very bottom, handwritten, is Nicole Ford. And that is interesting. It is also interesting that there were district attorneys from San Francisco and other places supporting her. And the former DA in Santa Clara County, who ran against Jeff Rosen and lost by a very narrow margin back in 2010, is supporting her. So they're interesting. I probably could write a story about it, but the story really is how hard the court and Lisa Herrick worked to keep the public from these records. And if there had not been a journalist pounding on their door, emailing, sending people in. Today I sent an 80-year-old man in to get the records and pay the $6. And Lisa Herrick tried to say that, oh, well, if you don't have change, they wouldn't be able to give us the records. So I just want to, I did this because I want to remind everybody of the different types of records. Just like yesterday we talked about in the live, the different types of court hearings that can either be administrative or judicial. And now I just wanted to go over the types of records. So one more time, there are state records that you would get, which would be Department of Motor Vehicles, the dog catcher, the police departments, and not just state records. For instance, the California Highway Patrol is the security that manages the state properties like this one. So if you want to put a booth out here, you have to get a permit from the California Highway Patrol. If you want to petition here, you have to do that. And they provide the security for that. And then they have private security. Like you can see this private security guard over here lowering the flag. They kind of monitor and keep the peace here today and every day. They didn't do much when the guy was going off in DMV at the beginning when I was here yesterday, but that's how security works in these places. And so you can do public records requests for how much are taxpayers paying for these security guards. You can do it to the Highway Patrol, which is our roads and our freeways. You can do it to the dog catcher. Police records are based on the agency, so those could be a local your town that you get them from. And then the court records can either be adjudicated, which means the court files that people pay. Usually you have to pay 50 cents a page for those. And Lisa Herrick from the court here tried to charge me, she did charge me 50 cents a page, told me this was records in a binder. They were not. They were in a manila envelope. It was 12 pages and it was $6. So the government will always behave badly. They will always try to keep us from records, but please remember that the records are the people's business. And we created the records with our tax dollars and we have a right to them. So I'm going to do a longer video on this on Saturday, but I wanted to go over records. So put this, if anybody has questions about records, I hope that my work helps you obtain the records that you need. And whether you're a journalist writing the story about them, I hope that there's something in the records that make it worth your while to fight to get them, because these certainly were worth our while to fight for. So thanks everybody for coming in, 4:30 on a Wednesday or Thursday, and I appreciate you all being here.